At the gala, my sister mocked me as pathetic, soaking up every laugh at my expense. Then the CEO walked forward, introduced me as his wife, and the whole room froze in silence. You know those moments where you just want the floor to swallow you whole? I was deep in one when my sister's voice, sharp and venomous, sliced right through the elegant chatter of Manhattan's most exclusive charity gala. "Jessica, you're absolutely pathetic," Madison hissed, her emerald dress glinting under the crystal chandeliers. "Look at you in that bargain store outfit, pretending you belong here." The room seemed to hold its breath as every head swiveled toward us. My cheeks burned with shame, my simple black dress suddenly feeling like a scarlet letter. But what happened next shattered her world, not mine. Let me take you back a little. It was just another Tuesday. I was dragging myself off the subway at 42nd Street, the familiar exhaustion clinging to me after another 14-hour shift at Mercy General. My day wasn't over, though. I had exactly 47 minutes to get home, shower, and transform myself into someone worthy of attending the Hartwell Foundation Gala. Not because I wanted to go, but because my sister, Madison, had made it crystal clear that skipping the family's annual appearance would be social suicide. My cramped studio apartment in Queens felt even smaller after the hospital's sprawling corridors. I peeled off my scrubs, the fabric damp with sweat, carrying that antiseptic hospital smell that had become my permanent perfume. Looking in the bathroom mirror, I saw dark circles under my eyes, my auburn hair a messy bun, my skin pale from endless night shifts. 3 years of nursing school debt still haunted my bank account. And Madison? She never let me forget it. "If you just married well like I did, instead of chasing some noble calling," she'd say with her practiced, saccharine smile, "you wouldn't be living paycheck to paycheck." The black dress hanging in my closet was the same one I'd worn to every formal event for 2 years. Clearance rack, but it fit. And with my grandmother's pearl earrings, the only valuable thing I owned, it didn't scream, "budget buy." My phone buzzed. A text from Madison. "Please tell me you're not wearing that same black dress again. The Hartwells will be there, and I refuse to be embarrassed by association." I typed back, "I'll look appropriate. See you there." Her immediate response was a punch to the gut. "Appropriate isn't the same as impressive. Try to mingle. You never know who might take pity on you." The Hartwell Gala was the event, $3,000 a ticket. My family had attended for 15 years, all thanks to Madison's marriage to investment banker Trevor Ashford. And Madison, of course, never let me forget that my invitation was essentially charity. A pity plus one. I arrived at the plaza 40 minutes later, my heels clicking on marble. The grand ballroom was breathtaking, crystal chandeliers, silk-draped tables, white orchids, a string quartet. The guest list was like a living Forbes magazine. Tech moguls, real estate tycoons, pharmaceutical titans. People whose net worth dwarfed small countries. I spotted Madison immediately. She commanded attention in an emerald Valentino gown, diamonds glittering. Trevor, her husband, was beside her, his Harvard Business School smile firmly in place as he regaled a group with tales of his latest acquisition. Across the room, Madison's eyes found mine, and even from that distance, I saw her face shift from polite socialite charm to barely concealed disappointment. She excused herself and glided over, champagne flute in hand. "Jessica, darling." Her voice dripped with false warmth as she air-kissed both my cheeks. "You made it, and you're wearing that dress again." "It's a classic style," I replied, refusing to take the bait. "Classic." Her laugh was musical, but sharp. "That's one way to put it. Come, let me introduce you around, though I'm not sure what we'll say you do. This is my sister. She wipes up bodily fluids for a living. Doesn't exactly flow off the tongue." My jaw tightened. "I'm a registered nurse in the cardiac intensive care unit. I save lives." How noble. Her tone suggested it was anything but. "Though I notice it hasn't saved your bank account." Before I could respond, she was steering me toward a cluster of women discussing Hampton's vacation homes and private school college placement rates. Conversations that might as well have been in a foreign language. "Ladies, I'd like you to meet my sister Jessica," Madison announced. "She works in healthcare." Mrs. Peton, wife of a pharmaceutical CEO, offered a polite smile. How wonderful. Are you a doctor? I'm a nurse, I said, keeping my voice steady. The temperature in the group dropped several degrees. Mrs. Peton's smile strained. How admirable. Such important work. I recognized the tone, the one people used when discussing charitable causes they'd never personally touch. I was being patted on the head for my service, simultaneously categorized as someone who provided that service because she couldn't achieve anything better. Jessica went to nursing school instead of college. Madison added helpfully, each word a small knife twist. She's always been more practically minded than academically inclined. The truth was more complicated. I had gone to nursing school after college, driven by a desire to make a tangible difference. My bachelor's in biology had led me to nursing because I couldn't afford the additional years of medical school debt. But correcting Madison only made things worse. How fascinating, murmured Mrs. Vanderbilt, her attention already drifting over my shoulder. I excused myself and made my way to the bar, needing a moment to breathe. The bartender, a young guy my age, smiled sympathetically. Rough crowd, he asked quietly. You could say that. I took a sip of the wine, something that probably cost more per bottle than I made in a day. I've worked enough of these events to recognize the look, he said. You're not one of them, are you? I laughed, a real raw laugh. Is it that obvious? Let's just say you're the first person tonight who said please and thank you when ordering a drink. His observation stung because it was probably true. I watched the crowd, people who moved through the world expecting deference, treating staff as invisible until they needed something. I'd grown up in this world, before my parents' divorce had shifted our family dynamics, but I'd never quite fit the mold Madison had embraced so completely. My phone buzzed. Sarah, a coworker, how's the fancy party? Rubbing elbows with millionaires. I typed back, more like being tolerated by them. Can't wait to get home. Her response, hang in there. Remember, you belong anywhere you choose to be. Sarah's words were kind, but I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. I belonged in the hospital, where my skills mattered, where my background was irrelevant. I belonged in my small apartment, where I didn't have to apologize for my choices or explain why I drove a 10-year-old Honda. Here, surrounded by people who measured worth in stock portfolios, I felt like an imposter. A costume wearer. Madison had made sure I knew my place, grateful for inclusion, apologetic for my circumstances, always aware that my presence was an act of charity. I finished my wine and steeled myself to rejoin the crowd. The evening was still young. But as I turned from the bar, I caught sight of Madison, holding court near the auction tables, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear the familiar refrain about her poor dear sister, who chose service over success. The words hit like a physical blow, not just because they were cruel, but because a part of me wondered if they might be true. The auction announcements began. I found myself trapped in another stilted conversation about charity tax benefits. I nodded politely while Mrs. Blackwell explained how donating art to museums was really quite strategic from a financial planning perspective. I suspected the woman had never set foot in a public museum. Jessica. Madison's voice cut through like a blade again. Come here. There's someone I want you to meet. I excused myself and followed her toward a distinguished older man in an impeccably tailored suit. Silver hair, commanding presence. Jessica, this is Harold Peton, CEO of Peton Pharmaceuticals, Madison announced, with the pride of someone presenting a prize. Harold, this is my sister Jessica. She works at Mercy General. Harold's handshake was firm but brief. A healthcare professional. We always appreciate feedback from the front lines. Tell me, what do you think of our new cardiac medication protocols? I blinked. An actual opportunity to contribute something meaningful. Well, the recent trials for ACE inhibitor combinations have shown promising results, though we've noticed some patients experience more side effects than anticipated with the higher dosages. How fascinating, Harold interrupted, his tone suggesting it was anything but. Madison, didn't you mention your sister was in nursing? I was hoping to speak with a physician about clinical outcomes. The dismissal was swift, surgical. My cheeks burned as Madison's smile grew strained. Yes, Jessica is a nurse, Madison said quickly. She's very hands-on with patient care. Of course, of course. Nurses do important work, Harold said, with the same tone one might use to praise a child's finger painting. If you'll excuse me, I see Dr. Morrison across the room. I'd like to discuss the research grant committee with him. As Harold walked away, Madison turned to me, barely concealed frustration etched on her face. Really, Jessica? You couldn't just smile and nod? You had to launch into medical jargon like you're qualified to discuss pharmaceutical research. I am qualified, I said quietly. I work with these medications every day. I see how they affect real patients. You're a nurse, Madison hissed. You follow orders. You don't make research decisions or influence policy. There's a difference between taking vital signs and understanding the business of medicine. Her words stung because they echoed doubts I sometimes had myself. In the hospital, I was respected. Here, my knowledge was dismissed as cute but irrelevant. Trevor appeared, champagne flute in hand, his usual satisfied expression. Ladies, what's the discussion? You both look terribly serious. Just explaining to Jessica how networking actually works, Madison said. She's still learning the nuances of these events. Trevor's nod was patronizing. It takes time to understand the social dynamics. Not everyone grows up knowing how to navigate these circles. I wanted to point out that I had grown up in these circles, that I'd attended prep school with half the people here before the divorce. But correcting him would only invite more questions about why I'd ended up as a nurse if I'd had other opportunities. Speaking of networking, Trevor continued, Madison, Mrs. Ashford wants to discuss the country club membership committee. Something about making sure the new applicants meet the right standards. Madison's eyes lit up. Of course. Jessica, why don't you mingle? Try the silent auction tables. Some of those items are quite affordable. The suggestion, delivered with her signature smile, carried an unmistakable message. I was being dismissed, relegated to browsing items I couldn't afford while Madison handled important social business. I wandered to the silent auction, items ranging from weekend getaways to luxury goods. I paused at a spa weekend in the Catskills. Current bid, $1,200. More than my monthly grocery budget. Not tempting enough for you? I turned to find a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and an understated elegance. Her navy dress was expensive but not flashy, her jewelry classic. It sounds lovely, I replied honestly. Just not in my budget right now. I appreciate honesty, the woman said. I'm Catherine Walsh, and you are? Jessica Whitmore. We shook hands. Her grip was firm, genuine. Whitmore. Are you related to Madison Ashford? She's my sister. Catherine's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. I see. And what brings you to tonight's event? Family obligation, I blurted, then immediately regretted my candor. I mean, supporting the cause, of course. Catherine laughed. A real laugh. Not the practice tinkle I'd been hearing all evening. Family obligation. I appreciate that even more than honesty. What do you do when you're not fulfilling family obligations? I'm a nurse at Mercy General Cardiac ICU. That must be incredibly demanding work. How long have you been there? 3 years now. It's challenging, but I love it. For the first time all evening, I found myself in a conversation where my profession wasn't treated as a consolation prize. Catherine asked thoughtful questions about cardiac care, healthcare policy changes, the emotional toll of working with critically ill patients. Our conversation was interrupted by Madison's approach, her smile bright, her eyes calculating. Jessica, there you are. I see you met Catherine. Her tone was carefully modulated. She knew exactly who Catherine Walsh was. Yes, we were just discussing Jessica's work, Catherine said pleasantly. She's clearly passionate about patient care. Oh yes, Jessica has always been very dedicated to helping people, Madison said. Though we keep telling her she could do so much more with her background. She has a bachelor's degree, you know. She could easily transition into healthcare administration or pharmaceutical sales, something with more growth potential. I felt the familiar shame creep up my neck. Madison had perfected the art of the backhanded compliment. More growth potential than saving lives? Catherine asked, her tone pleasant but with an edge that made Madison's smile falter slightly. Well, of course the work is meaningful, Madison backtracked. I just mean financially. Jessica struggles quite a bit, and we worry about her future. She's getting older, and nursing is such physically demanding work. We'd hate to see her unable to support herself later. The conversation had taken a familiar turn, Madison positioning herself as the concerned older sister, worried about my poor life choices. It was a narrative she'd perfected over the years, casting my career as noble but naive, and herself as the practical voice of reason. I should check on Trevor, Madison continued. Catherine, it was lovely seeing you again. Jessica, try to enjoy yourself and please don't monopolize people's time with work stories. Not everyone finds medical details as fascinating as you do. As she glided away, I felt that familiar mixture of embarrassment and anger. She'd managed to make my passionate discussion sound like tedious shop talk. Your sister certainly has strong opinions about your career choices, Catherine observed. Carefully. Madison means well, I said automatically, though the words felt hollow. She just worries that I'm not living up to my potential. And what do you think your potential is? The question caught me off guard. No one ever asked me what I thought about my own potential. They just told me what it should be. I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, I said quietly. I help people on the worst days of their lives. I hold hands with scared patients and explain procedures in terms they can understand. I catch medication errors and advocate for pain management and comfort families who are watching their loved ones struggle. That feels like potential fulfilled to me. Catherine smiled. The first completely genuine smile I'd received all evening. It sounds like it to me too. Our conversation was interrupted by the evening's master of ceremonies announcing auction winners. I used the distraction to slip away, needing a moment to collect myself. I found a quiet alcove near the grand staircase, away from the glittering crowd. For the first time in hours, I could breathe without feeling like I was performing. My phone buzzed. Charge nurse, hope you're having fun at your fancy party. Try not to think about work for one night. I smiled wryly. If only she knew that work was the one topic that had made me feel human tonight. At the hospital, I was respected. Here, I was a curiosity at best, a charity case at worst. I was about to return to the ballroom when my phone rang. The caller ID made my heart skip. Mercy General. This is Jessica. Jessica, it's Dr. Martinez. I know you're at an event tonight, but we have a situation. Mr. Harrison in bed 7, his condition deteriorated rapidly. His family is asking for you specifically. They say you're the only one who's been able to calm him during his episodes. I closed my eyes, feeling the pull between obligation and duty. What's his status? Stable for now, but scared. The new night nurse is confident, but he keeps asking for the red-haired nurse who explains things. His daughter drove up from Virginia when she heard he was asking for you. In the ballroom behind me, I could hear Madison's laughter, probably regaling someone with another story about my quaint career choices. I thought about Mr. Harrison, a retired teacher in the ICU for 2 weeks. He told me about his garden, shown me pictures of his grandchildren. I'd held his hand during the scariest moments of his recovery. I'll be there in 40 minutes, I said. Are you sure? I know tonight was important. This is more important. As I gathered my purse, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly like what I was, a woman in an affordable dress, wearing her grandmother's pearls, about to leave a society gala to go comfort a frightened patient. For the first time all evening, I felt proud of my reflection. I slipped out of the plaza into the crisp Manhattan evening, my heels clicking on the sidewalk as I hurried toward the subway. The transition from the gala's opulent warmth to the city's harsh fluorescent lighting felt like stepping between two different worlds. One where I was barely tolerated, and another where I was genuinely needed. The subway ride gave me time to decompress. At Mercy General, I changed out of my dress, pulling on fresh scrubs that felt more like armor than any elegant gown ever could. Stepping into the ICU, the familiar sounds of monitors beeping and ventilators humming welcomed me home. Thank God you're here. Maria Santos, the night nurse, exclaimed. Mr. Harrison's been asking for you every 10 minutes. His daughter's been pacing since she arrived from Virginia. I found Thomas Harrison in bed 7, his weathered hands gripping the bed rails, struggling with anxiety despite the sedatives. "Mr. Harrison, I'm here," I said softly, placing my hand over his. "How are you feeling?" His eyes opened, focusing on my face with visible relief. "Jessica, thank heavens. I was having those dreams again, the ones where I can't breathe. The other nurse, she's very nice, but she doesn't explain things the way you do." I spent the next hour with Mr. Harrison and his daughter, Linda, explaining test results and medication adjustments in terms they could understand. I showed them how to read the monitors, what the alarms meant, why procedures were necessary. By the time I left his room, both father and daughter were visibly calmer. "How do you do that?" Linda asked as we walked toward the elevator. "I've been terrified for 2 weeks, and you just made everything make sense." "It's about translation," I explained. "Medical terminology can sound scary. Your father's heart is damaged, but it's also healing. The monitors that seem frightening are actually tracking his progress." Linda hugged me unexpectedly. "Thank you. Not just for tonight, but for the past 2 weeks. Dad talks about you constantly. He says you're the only one who treats him like a person instead of a condition." As I drove home at 2 a.m., I reflected on the contrast. At the gala, my medical knowledge had been dismissed. Here, that same knowledge had provided comfort. My phone buzzed with texts. "Madison, where did you disappear to? Trevor said he saw you leaving early. Very rude to sneak out." Then an unknown number. "Jessica, this is Catherine Walsh from tonight's event. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from the Hartwell Foundation. Would you be interested in coffee this week? I'd like to continue our conversation about healthcare advocacy. And finally, Sarah, heard you came in tonight after your fancy party. You know you don't have to save everyone, right? Though I'm glad you were here for the Harrisons." I smiled at Sarah's message. She understood something Madison never would. Choosing to care for others wasn't a limitation. It was a profound act of self-direction. The following morning brought an unexpected phone call that would truly shift everything. I was making coffee when my phone rang, a number I recognized from my past, but hadn't seen in months. "Jessica, it's Jonathan Mitchell from Hamilton Mitchell and Associates." Jonathan had been my father's attorney before the divorce. I'd assumed our family's legal business had concluded years ago. "Jonathan, hello. Is everything all right? Actually, I'm calling with some unexpected news. Your grandmother's estate has been settled, and there are some assets that need to be claimed. Could you come in this week to discuss the details?" I frowned. My paternal grandmother had passed away 8 months earlier, but we'd been told her modest estate would barely cover her debts. I thought Grandmother Rose's estate was insolvent? That's what we believed initially, but some additional assets have come to light. Properties and investments that weren't in her regular portfolio. It's quite substantial, actually. I'd prefer to discuss the specifics in person. After arranging to meet Jonathan on Thursday, I spent the rest of the week puzzling over this. Grandmother Rose had lived modestly in a small apartment in Brooklyn, surviving on Social Security and a tiny pension from her decades as a public school librarian. Hidden wealth? It seemed impossible. Thursday's meeting provided answers that raised even more questions. Jonathan's conference room overlooked Manhattan's financial district, and the documents spread across his mahogany table told a story I had never known. Your grandmother was quite the investor, Jonathan explained, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. She'd been purchasing real estate and blue-chip stocks for decades, but kept the investments in separate accounts under her maiden name. She lived frugally to maximize her purchasing power, and the compound growth has been remarkable. The numbers on the portfolio statements made my hands shake. Real estate holdings in Brooklyn and Queens worth millions. Stock investments that had appreciated dramatically over 30 years. Municipal bonds. Why didn't anyone know about this? I asked, still staring at the figures. Your grandmother was very private about her finances. She made it clear she wanted her wealth to remain secret until after her death. Apparently, she'd seen how money changed family dynamics and preferred to maintain her modest lifestyle. Jonathan pulled out a sealed envelope marked with my name in her careful handwriting. She left specific instructions about the inheritance distribution. Your parents and Madison receive modest amounts, enough to be meaningful, but not life-changing. But the bulk of the estate goes to you. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and read my grandmother's letter. My dearest Jessica, if you're reading this, then my secret has finally been revealed. I've watched you choose a path of service over profit, compassion over convenience, and integrity over advantage. While others in our family have sought wealth and status, you've built a life around caring for others. This inheritance isn't a reward for your choices. It's a tool to help you continue making them freely. Use this gift to support the work you love without the financial pressures that might force you to compromise your values. Your commitment to healing others has always made me proud. Now you can heal others from a position of strength rather than struggle. All my love, Grandmother Rose. The legal paperwork would take weeks to finalize, but Jonathan explained I could begin accessing funds immediately. Enough money to eliminate my student loans, purchase a home, and live comfortably while continuing my nursing career. As I walked back to the subway, my mind reeled with possibilities. Pay off debts. A larger apartment. Reduce overtime shifts. Pursue advanced degrees without financial stress. But more immediately, I realized this inheritance changed the fundamental dynamic with Madison. Her condescending concern about my financial future was now irrelevant. The poor dear sister narrative she'd crafted would need significant revision. I decided to keep the inheritance quiet for now. I wanted time to process the implications before dealing with family reactions. I'd learned from my grandmother's example that privacy about money could be valuable, especially when navigating complicated family relationships. That evening, I received another text from Catherine Walsh. I hope you'll consider my coffee invitation. I have a proposition that might interest you. Something related to healthcare advocacy and policy reform. Your insights could be valuable to some important conversations happening in the city. I stared at the message, wondering if Catherine somehow knew about the inheritance, or if this was simply coincidence. Either way, the timing felt significant. For the first time in years, I had options beyond simply surviving paycheck to paycheck. I typed back, I'd love to meet for coffee. How about Saturday morning? Catherine's response came quickly. Perfect. Meridian Cafe. 10 a.m. And Jessica, wear something comfortable. We'll have a lot to discuss. As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. I looked the same, tired from my shift, hair pulled back, face free of makeup. But something in my eyes had changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at a woman barely staying afloat. I was looking at someone with choices. The inheritance wouldn't change who I was or what I valued, but it would change how others perceived me once they knew about it. The question was when and how to reveal this new reality, especially to Madison, who had built her entire relationship with me around the assumption of financial superiority. I smiled at my reflection, remembering Grandmother Rose's words about healing from a position of strength. Tomorrow I would continue caring for patients as I always had. But now I did so knowing that my service was a choice made freely, not a necessity born of limited options. The foundation of my world had shifted, even if no one else knew it yet. Saturday morning arrived with an unexpected snowfall, transforming Manhattan's harsh edges into something softer. I stood outside Meridian Cafe, studying the elegant establishment. Unlike the corporate coffee chains I usually frequented, this place exuded understated luxury. Catherine Walsh was already seated, dressed in a cream cashmere sweater. She smiled warmly, rising to offer a genuine embrace rather than the air kisses that had been my recent social currency. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, gesturing for me to sit. I took the liberty of ordering their signature blend. It's exceptional. As we settled into conversation, I found myself relaxing in a way I hadn't at the gala. Catherine had that rare ability to ask probing questions while making them feel like natural curiosity rather than interrogation. "Tell me about your work at Mercy General. What drew you to cardiac care specifically?" I described my rotation through different units, how I'd gravitated toward the ICU despite its emotional intensity. I explained the satisfaction of seeing patients progress, the privilege of supporting families. "It sounds like you found your calling," Catherine observed. "That's rarer than people imagine, especially in healthcare where burnout is so common." I have colleagues who've switched to administrative roles or pharmaceutical sales for better work-life balance, I admitted. Sometimes I wonder if I'm being stubborn by staying in direct patient care. Catherine leaned forward slightly. What do you think drives that doubt? External pressure or internal questioning? The question struck deeper than I expected. Probably both. My family thinks I'm limiting myself financially. They see nursing as a stepping stone rather than a destination. And what do you see it as? Home, I said without hesitation. It's where I belong. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. That's actually why I wanted to meet with you. Your perspective on healthcare, seeing it from the ground level, understanding both the clinical and emotional aspects, that's invaluable insight that's often missing from policy discussions. She explained that she served on the board of the Metropolitan Healthcare Initiative, a nonprofit focused on healthcare access and quality improvement. They were launching a new advocacy program that would bring frontline healthcare workers into policy conversations with legislators and executives. We need voices like yours, Catherine continued. People who can translate the real-world impact of policy decisions, who understand how legislation affects actual patient care. I felt a familiar stirring of interest, the same feeling I'd had when first discovering my passion for nursing. What would that involvement look like? Initially, participating in roundtable discussions with state legislators about healthcare funding, eventually perhaps testifying before committees or speaking at healthcare conferences. We'd provide training on policy advocacy and public speaking. The opportunity felt like a perfect intersection of my clinical expertise and my desire to create broader change. But I hesitated, thinking of Madison's dismissive comments about staying in my lane. I'm not sure I have the credentials for that level of involvement, I said carefully. Catherine's eyebrows rose. You have 3 years of intensive care experience, a bachelor's degree, and first-hand knowledge of how healthcare policies affect vulnerable populations. What credentials do you think you're missing? Well, I'm not a doctor or administrator. I don't have an advanced degree in policy or... Jessica, Catherine interrupted gently. Who told you that your experience isn't valuable enough? The question hung in the air. I realized I'd internalized Madison's narrative so completely that I'd begun to believe it myself. Her constant suggestions that I aim higher had actually convinced me to aim lower. You're right, I said slowly. I do have valuable perspective. More than valuable, essential. Catherine pulled out a leather portfolio. I'd like you to consider joining our advisory committee. The time commitment is flexible, and we provide compensation for participation in formal events. As she outlined the details, I felt something shifting inside me. This wasn't charity or pity. It was recognition of my expertise. Our conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing. An urgent text from Madison. Emergency family meeting tonight at Mother's. 7 p.m. Don't be late. I excused myself to respond, wondering what crisis required such dramatic summoning. Madison's follow-up text provided context. Trevor's promotion announcement. Big changes are coming. Need to discuss family dynamics. Everything all right? Catherine asked as I put my phone away. Family obligations, I said with a wry smile. My sister has called an emergency meeting. The sister from the gala who seems to have strong opinions about your career. I nodded. She means well, but we have different perspectives on success. I'm sure you do. Catherine's tone was neutral, but her expression suggested she understood more than she was saying. Jessica, before you go, I want to share something with you. I've been involved in healthcare advocacy for 20 years, and I've seen many talented people talk themselves out of opportunities because they didn't think they deserved them. Don't let anyone convince you that your voice doesn't matter. As we parted ways, Catherine handed me a business card with handwritten numbers on the back. My personal cell and home number. Call me when you've had time to think about the advisory committee position. And Jessica, trust your instincts. They've served you well so far. Walking to the subway, I felt energized in a way I hadn't experienced since finishing nursing school. The conversation with Catherine had reminded me that my expertise extended beyond bedside manner. I understood healthcare systems, patient advocacy, and the gap between policy intentions and real-world outcomes. My phone rang as I descended into the subway station. Mercy General's number. Jessica, it's Dr. Martinez again. I hate to call you on your day off, but we have a situation that could use your expertise. What's happening? Remember the Harrison family? They're back. Mr. Harrison's daughter, Linda, called this morning asking specifically for you. Her father's been readmitted to Mount Sinai, but she wants him transferred to our cardiac unit. She said he's been asking for his nurse, Jessica, and refusing to cooperate with the staff there. I felt a familiar tug of professional obligation mixed with personal satisfaction. My relationship with patients like Mr. Harrison represented the kind of impact that couldn't be measured in salary figures or social status. What do you need from me? Could you call Linda directly? Maybe help coordinate the transfer if it's medically appropriate. I know it's your weekend, but send me her number. I'll call her now. As I rode the subway home, I found myself thinking about the contrast between my morning and afternoon. With Catherine, I'd been treated as an expert whose insights were valuable. In a few hours, I'd face Madison's family meeting where my choices would likely be questioned and my potential minimized. The call with Linda Harrison reinforced my professional confidence. Mr. Harrison's condition had deteriorated after a medication error at Mount Sinai. Linda was desperate to get him transferred. He keeps asking for you, Linda explained. He says you're the only one who makes him feel safe. The doctors here are competent, but they don't communicate the way you do. He's scared and confused, and when he's scared, his heart rate spikes. I spent 20 minutes on the phone with Linda, then called Dr. Martinez to discuss transfer logistics. By the time I reached my apartment, I helped coordinate Mr. Harrison's move and arranged to check on him during my next shift. As I prepared for the family meeting, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked the same, but something had changed. The morning's conversation with Catherine, the afternoon's successful patient advocacy, had reminded me of my own competence and value. I thought about the inheritance, the policy advocacy opportunity Catherine had offered, and the respect I commanded in my professional environment. For the first time in years, I wasn't approaching a family gathering from a position of defensiveness. My phone buzzed with another text from Madison. Bring the good wine if you have any. This is a celebration, not a pity party. I smiled. Madison's assumption that I couldn't afford good wine was about to become one of many misconceptions that would need revision. But tonight wasn't about revelations. It was about observing family dynamics from my new perspective as someone with options rather than obligations. I selected a respectable bottle of wine from my modest collection and prepared to face whatever drama Madison had orchestrated. As I locked my apartment door, I realized I was actually looking forward to the evening. Not because I expected it to be pleasant, but because I was curious to see how family interactions felt when approached from a position of inner strength rather than financial insecurity. The power dynamics that had defined my relationship with Madison for years were shifting, even if Madison didn't know it yet. And for the first time, I felt ready to let those shifts unfold naturally, rather than fighting to maintain familiar patterns that no longer served me. The Whitmore family brownstone on the Upper West Side had been our mother's pride before the divorce. Financial constraints had forced Eleanor Whitmore to convert it into a duplex, renting out the garden level. I arrived at 7 sharp, wine bottle in hand, to find Madison's BMW already parked outside. Through the tall windows, I could see my family gathered in the living room, Madison gesticulating enthusiastically, Trevor nodding along, our mother listening with her characteristic expression of polite attention masking genuine disinterest. Eleanor answered the door, wearing one of her signature St. John knit suits, her silver hair perfectly styled. "Jessica, darling, you look tired," she said, accepting the air kiss ritual. "Madison says you left the Hartwell Gala early. I hope it wasn't one of your work emergencies again." The criticism was delivered with maternal concern, but I recognized the underlying message. My dedication to nursing was an inconvenience that disrupted family obligations. A patient needed me, I replied simply, following her into the living room where Madison and Trevor were arranged on the cream-colored sofa like a magazine. Advertisement for successful young couples. Perfect timing. Madison rose to embrace me, the gesture warm but performative. "We have the most exciting news to share." Trevor stood as well, his Harvard Business School smile at full wattage. "Jessica, great to see you." Madison insisted we couldn't make any announcements without the whole family present. I settled into my father's old wingback chair, accepting a glass of white wine from Madison, wondering what drama was about to unfold. In my experience, family meetings called by Madison typically involved either someone else's crisis or Madison's triumph. Rarely anything that required my input. "Before we begin," Eleanor said, taking her place in the matching chair across from me, "I want to address what happened at the Hartwell Gala." Madison mentioned there were some social challenges. My stomach tightened. What kind of challenges? Madison exchanged a meaningful look with Trevor before turning to me with an expression of sisterly concern. "Darling, I've been thinking about our conversation with Harold Peton, and I realized I may not have prepared you adequately for that level of networking." "Prepared me how?" "Well, discussing medical procedures with pharmaceutical executives isn't really appropriate small talk," Madison explained gently. "I could see Harold becoming uncomfortable when you started talking about clinical trials and patient side effects. It's not the kind of conversation that builds professional relationships." Trevor nodded sagely. "In business, you have to read the room. Know when someone wants to discuss industry matters versus when they're just making polite conversation." I felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rising in my cheeks. But something new accompanied it, a clarity that hadn't been there before. I thought about my conversation with Catherine Walsh, who had found my clinical insights valuable rather than inappropriate. "Actually," I said carefully, "Harold asked me specifically about cardiac medication protocols." I was responding to his question. "Of course, he was being polite," Madison said. "But when someone of his stature asks about your work, they're expecting a brief, modest response, not a detailed analysis of drug efficacy." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "Jessica, dear, Madison is just trying to help you navigate these situations more successfully. We all want you to make good impressions." The intervention felt coordinated, and I realized this wasn't about Trevor's promotion announcement at all. This was about managing my social performance. "What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked. Madison brightened, apparently relieved that I was receptive to feedback. "I've been talking to some friends about opportunities that might be a better fit for your background. Sarah Hutchinson, you remember her from prep school? She's now in pharmaceutical sales, and she makes fantastic money. Much more than nursing, and the social connections are incredible." "Or healthcare administration," Trevor added. "Corporate wellness programs are huge right now. Companies pay well for people who understand medical systems, but can think strategically about business applications." I looked around the room at three faces wearing expressions of helpful concern. They genuinely believed they were rescuing me, offering guidance that would improve my prospects and social standing. "Let me make sure I understand," I said slowly. "You want me to leave direct patient care for a sales job or corporate position because it would be more socially acceptable at charity galas?" "Not just socially acceptable," Madison corrected. "Financially sustainable. Jessica, you're 31 years old. You can't live paycheck to paycheck forever. What happens when you're too old for the physical demands of ICU nursing? What about retirement planning or buying a home or starting a family?" The questions hung in the air, each one representing years of Madison's accumulated concern. They were reasonable questions, but they were based on assumptions that were no longer accurate. "Madison," I said carefully, "what if money wasn't a factor in my career decisions?" Trevor laughed, not unkindly, but with the confident dismissal of someone who understood financial realities. "Money is always a factor, Jessica. Even people who claim to work for passion need to support themselves." Of course, I agreed. "But hypothetically, if I had financial security, would you still want me to change careers?" Madison's expression shifted slightly, as if she sensed something unexpected in my tone. "Well, I suppose if you had unlimited resources, you could afford to stay in nursing. But that's not realistic for someone in your situation." "What situation is that, Madison?" "Don't be defensive," Eleanor interjected. "We're not criticizing your choices. We're simply concerned about your long-term security." I felt a moment of decision crystallizing. I could continue accepting their narrative about my limitations, or I could begin reshaping their understanding of who I actually was. "What if I told you I don't need financial security because I already have it?" The room fell silent. Madison's wine glass paused halfway to her lips. Trevor's confident smile faltered, and Eleanor's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. What do you mean? Madison asked carefully. I took a breath, remembering my grandmother's letter about healing from a position of strength. Grandmother Rose left me an inheritance. A substantial one. That's impossible, Madison said immediately. Grandmother Rose barely had enough money to pay for her funeral. The estate was insolvent. That's what everyone believed, I agreed. But she had been investing for decades under her maiden name. Real estate, stocks, bonds. The inheritance is enough to eliminate my student loans, buy a home, and live comfortably while continuing my nursing career. Trevor's business-trained mind kicked into gear first. How substantial are we talking about? Substantial enough that your concerns about my financial future are no longer relevant, I replied. Madison set down her wine glass with a sharp click. Why didn't you tell us about this inheritance earlier? Because I wanted time to process it without outside opinions about how I should use it. Outside opinions? Madison's voice rose slightly. We're your family. We've been worried about your financial situation for years, and you let us go on thinking you were struggling. I looked at my sister's indignant expression and realized this moment had been inevitable. Madison's entire relationship with me was built on the assumption of my financial inferiority. Remove that foundation, and the dynamic shifted completely. I am financially secure, I said clearly. I choose to work in nursing because I love it, not because I'm trapped by circumstances. The inheritance doesn't change what I want to do with my life. It just removes the pressure to compromise my values for financial reasons. Eleanor's practiced composure cracked slightly. How much money are we discussing, Jessica? Enough, I replied. More than enough. The family meeting that was supposed to celebrate Trevor's promotion had become something entirely different. I could see each of them recalibrating their understanding of my position, their advice, their assumptions. Well, Trevor said after a long pause. That certainly changes things. Madison was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. All this time, when we were offering to help you financially, suggesting career changes, worrying about your future. You already had money. I had security, I corrected. Which means my choices are genuine preferences, not desperate necessities. But you still live in that tiny apartment in Queens, Madison protested. You still work double shifts and drive that old Honda. Because I like my life, I said simply. The inheritance doesn't change who I am or what matters to me. It just means I can be who I am without apology. Eleanor was the first to recover her social grace. Well, this is certainly unexpected news. I suppose congratulations are in order, but I could see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Madison looked stunned, as if the fundamental laws of physics had suddenly shifted. I think I said, rising from my chair, I should let you process this information. Trevor, congratulations on your promotion. I hope we can celebrate that properly next time. As I gathered my purse and moved toward the door, Madison found her voice. Jessica, wait. We need to talk about this more. There are implications, decisions to make, family considerations. There really aren't, I replied gently. Nothing has changed except your knowledge of my circumstances. I'm still the same person, making the same choices for the same reasons. But as I stepped into the cold Manhattan evening, I knew that wasn't entirely true. My circumstances hadn't changed, but my willingness to let others define my limitations had shifted completely. The inheritance had given me something more valuable than financial security. It had given me the confidence to stop apologizing for choices made from strength rather than weakness. Behind me, I could hear the muffled sounds of intense conversation resuming in the living room. Tomorrow, there would be phone calls and follow-up meetings. But tonight, I felt the freedom that came from no longer needing others' approval for the life I had chosen to build. The week following my revelation unfolded like dominoes falling in slow motion. Monday brought 3 voicemails from Madison, each one progressively more urgent. Tuesday delivered a handwritten note from Eleanor requesting a proper family discussion about future planning. By Wednesday, Trevor had somehow obtained my work number and called during my lunch break to discuss investment strategies and tax implications. I let the calls go unanswered while I focused on finalizing the inheritance paperwork with Jonathan Mitchell. The legal process was moving smoothly, but each signature on documents transferring substantial assets felt surreal. My grandmother's careful planning had created a foundation of financial security that changed everything while appearing to change nothing in my daily routine. Thursday morning brought an unexpected visitor to the cardiac ICU. I was reviewing medication charts when Maria Santos approached with a puzzled expression. "There's a well-dressed woman at the nurse's station asking for you," Maria said. "She's your sister. Should I tell her you're busy with patients?" Through the glass partition, I could see Madison standing near the central monitoring station, looking profoundly out of place in her tailored Chanel suit among the scrubs and medical equipment. Several of my colleagues were glancing curiously at the elegantly dressed visitor. "I'll handle it," I said, removing my stethoscope and walking toward the station. Madison's smile was bright but strained as she spotted me. "Surprise. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to see where you work." The lie was transparent. Madison's law firm was in Midtown Manhattan, nowhere near Mercy General's location in the Bronx. This was a reconnaissance mission disguised as sisterly concern. "This isn't really a place for social visits," I said quietly, conscious of my colleague's attention. "Patient confidentiality and infection control protocols." "Of course, I understand completely," Madison replied, though her eyes were busy cataloging details of the ICU environment. "I just wanted to understand your world better, especially now that we know your financial situation has changed." The emphasis on "now" carried weight, and I realized Madison was struggling to reconcile the inheritance revelation with my continued presence in this demanding, modestly paid profession. "My work hasn't changed," I said simply. "But it could," Madison replied. "That's what I wanted to discuss. With your new resources, you could pursue so many other opportunities. Medical school, healthcare administration, even starting your own consulting practice." Dr. Martinez appeared beside us, his expression professionally polite, but clearly questioning the appropriateness of this conversation in a patient care area. "Jessica, I hate to interrupt, but Mrs. Chin in bed 12 is asking for you specifically. Her family has questions about the post-operative care plan." Of course, I turned to Madison. "I need to go. Patients come first here." Madison's smile faltered slightly. "Could we continue this conversation later? Maybe dinner tonight?" "My treat, naturally." Given your situation, perhaps you'd prefer to choose the restaurant." The awkward recalibration of our financial dynamic was painful to watch. Madison was clearly struggling to adjust her approach now that her assumptions about my limitations had been shattered. "I'm working a double shift today," I said. "Rain check." As Madison left the ICU, I noticed several colleagues exchanging glances. Maria Santos approached with barely concealed curiosity. "Your sister seems intense," Maria observed diplomatically. "She's adjusting to some recent news," I replied, then changed the subject to Mrs. Chen's medication schedule. But the visit had planted a seed of awareness among my colleagues that my family dynamics were more complicated than they'd realized. Friday brought a call from Catherine Walsh that provided a welcome contrast to my family's persistence. "Jessica, I hope you've had time to consider our discussion about the healthcare advocacy position," Catherine said. "I have some exciting developments to share." We arranged to meet at Catherine's office in the Flatiron District, a sleek space that managed to feel both professional and welcoming. Catherine's assistant offered excellent coffee while I settled into a comfortable chair facing floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Madison Square Park. "The Metropolitan Healthcare Initiative Board met yesterday," Catherine began, "and I presented your background and perspective. The response was unanimously enthusiastic." She outlined a position that would involve testifying before state healthcare committees, participating in policy working groups, and speaking at medical conferences about the gap between healthcare legislation and frontline implementation. "The compensation is substantial," Catherine continued, naming a figure that exceeded my nursing salary. "But more importantly, it's an opportunity to influence healthcare policy at the state and potentially federal level." I felt the familiar stirring of excitement at the prospect of meaningful work that could create systemic change. What would be the time commitment? Flexible. You could maintain your clinical work while taking on advocacy responsibilities as your schedule permits. Many of our most effective advocates are practicing professionals who bring real-world credibility to policy discussions. As we discussed details, I realized this opportunity represented exactly the kind of work I'd always imagined doing, combining my clinical expertise with broader impact on healthcare systems. The inheritance had given me the financial freedom to pursue such opportunities without worrying about salary implications. There's one more thing, Catherine added with a slight smile. The position includes an invitation to present at the annual Healthcare Innovation Gala next month. It's the premier healthcare policy event in the region. All the major players attend. My interest sharpened. A platform to speak about healthcare advocacy to influential decision-makers sounded like the perfect intersection of my professional expertise and my desire for systemic change. I'd like to accept the position, I said without hesitation. Catherine's smile broadened. Wonderful. I had a feeling you would. As we shook hands on the agreement, I felt a profound sense of alignment. For the first time since the inheritance revelation, I was making a decision that felt entirely my own. Not a response to family pressure or financial necessity, but a choice driven by passion and purpose. The weekend brought the inevitable family summit. Eleanor had scheduled Sunday brunch at an upscale restaurant in the village, ostensibly to celebrate my good fortune, but actually to conduct what felt like a formal interview about my intentions. Madison arrived wearing a subdued expression that suggested she'd spent considerable time processing the week's revelations. Trevor was his usual composed self, though I noticed he treated me with a new level of deference that felt simultaneously gratifying and slightly uncomfortable. Jessica, Eleanor began once we'd ordered. We've all had time to absorb your news, and we want you to know how happy we are for you. The words were correct, but I detected underlying currents of confusion and perhaps resentment. My financial independence had disrupted carefully established family roles, and everyone was struggling to find their footing in the new dynamic. Thank you, I replied simply. Madison leaned forward slightly. We've been discussing some concerns, though. Mostly about making sure you're positioned to make the most of this opportunity. What kind of concerns? Trevor cleared his throat. Well, wealth management is complex. Investment strategies, tax planning, estate considerations. You'll need professional guidance to protect and grow these assets. I nodded. Jonathan Mitchell is handling the legal aspects, and I'm meeting with a financial advisor next week. That's good, Madison said. But we're also thinking about social positioning. With your new status, you'll have access to different circles, different opportunities. It might be worth considering how you present yourself professionally. The suggestion hung in the air, and I realized they were still trying to convince me to abandon nursing. Now, from a position of social climbing rather than financial necessity. I've actually accepted a position with the Metropolitan Healthcare Initiative, I said. Healthcare policy advocacy and legislative testimony. Eleanor's eyebrows rose. That sounds very prestigious. It's meaningful work, I corrected gently, and it allows me to maintain my clinical practice while having a broader impact on healthcare systems. Madison's expression suggested she was calculating the social implications of having a sister involved in healthcare policy rather than direct patient care. That's certainly more appropriate for someone in your position. The comment stung because it revealed Madison's fundamental misunderstanding of my motivations. My sister still believed that my career choices were about social positioning rather than personal calling. Madison, I said carefully, I need you to understand something. The inheritance doesn't change who I am or what I value. It just removes the pressure to compromise those values for financial reasons. But surely you see the opportunities this creates? Madison insisted. You could move to Manhattan, join the right clubs, meet the right people. You could have real influence in important circles. I looked around the table at three faces wearing expressions of helpful concern mixed with obvious frustration at my apparent failure to grasp the social possibilities my wealth had created. I have influence where it matters most, I said quietly. With patients who trust me, in policy discussions where my expertise is valued, and in a profession that makes a tangible difference in people's lives. The brunch concluded with polite but strained conversation. As we prepared to leave, Madison pulled me aside for a private moment. I don't understand, Madison said, her voice carrying genuine confusion. You have the chance to be anything, do anything. Why are you so determined to stay exactly where you are? I looked at my sister, Beautiful, successful, socially accomplished, and fundamentally unable to comprehend choosing purpose over position. Because where I am is exactly where I belong, I replied. The inheritance didn't change my destination, Madison. It just removed the obstacles that might have forced me to take detours. As I walked away from the restaurant, I felt the satisfaction that came from articulating my values clearly and standing by them regardless of others' opinions. The family dynamics that had defined our relationships for years were shifting, but I was no longer willing to apologize for choices made from strength rather than limitation. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine Walsh, official invitation to Healthcare Innovation Gala attached. Looking forward to working together on changing healthcare policy from the inside out. I smiled as I read the message. Sometimes the most important revolutions happened quietly, one authentic choice at a time. The Healthcare Innovation Gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, transforming the Great Hall into an elegant venue where medicine met policy under soaring stone arches. Unlike the Hartwell Foundation's charity atmosphere, this event buzzed with the energy of professionals united by purpose rather than social obligation. I arrived wearing a midnight blue dress I'd purchased specifically for the occasion. Not because I needed to impress anyone, but because I finally felt worthy of dressing for success. Catherine Walsh had arranged for me to present during the evening's keynote panel, Frontline Voices in Healthcare Policy. As I reviewed my notes in the museum's speaker lounge, I felt calm confidence rather than nervous energy. My presentation would focus on the gap between healthcare legislation and bedside implementation, drawing from specific patient cases to illustrate policy impacts. Jessica. Catherine appeared beside me, radiant in a silver evening gown. You look absolutely stunning. Are you ready to change some minds tonight? I'm ready to share what I've learned, I replied, adjusting the small microphone clip to my dress. Whether minds change will depend on how well I communicate. The speaker's lounge was filled with distinguished healthcare professionals, department chairs from major medical centers, pharmaceutical researchers, policy directors. I recognized several names from medical journals. 6 months ago, I would have felt intimidated. Tonight, I belonged here. Ladies and gentlemen, places please for the keynote panel, announced a gala coordinator. As I made my way toward the main hall, I spotted familiar faces in the crowd. Harold Petton, the pharmaceutical CEO who had dismissed my expertise at the Hartwell Gala, was seated at a prominent table near the front. Mrs. Blackwell and several other socialites from that evening were scattered throughout the audience, attending as board members of various healthcare foundations. And there, at a table near the center of the room, sat Madison and Trevor. My step faltered for just a moment as I registered their presence. Madison was wearing emerald green again, her signature color, and her expression was a carefully composed mask of sisterly support. Trevor sat beside her with his usual confident bearing, though I noticed him scanning the room with the calculating gaze of someone assessing professional networking opportunities. The Whitmore family contingent came to support you, Catherine murmured, following my gaze. Your sister called my office requesting tickets. She seemed quite determined to attend. I nodded, understanding that Madison's presence wasn't about support. It was about control. She needed to witness this moment to understand exactly how far I had traveled from the narrative she had constructed about my limitations. The panel was introduced by Dr. Rebecca Chin, the evening's moderator and chief medical officer at New York Presbyterian. As I took my place at the speaker table, I looked out at an audience of 500 healthcare professionals, policymakers, and medical industry leaders. Our final speaker tonight brings a perspective that's often missing from healthcare policy discussions, Dr. Chin announced. Jessica Whitmore is a cardiac intensive care nurse at Mercy General Hospital and our newest policy advocate with the Metropolitan Healthcare Initiative. She'll be speaking about the human impact of healthcare legislation. I approached the podium, feeling the weight of every patient's story I was about to share. Every policy failure I'd witnessed firsthand. Every moment my professional expertise had been dismissed because of my title rather than my knowledge. 6 months ago, I began, my voice clear and confident. I attended a charity gala where a pharmaceutical executive asked my opinion about cardiac medication protocols. When I responded with clinical observations based on 3 years of intensive care experience, I was told that my perspective wasn't appropriate for the conversation. A murmur rippled through the audience. Several people turned to look at Harold Peton, whose face had flushed slightly red. Tonight, I want to explain why that dismissal represents everything wrong with how we approach healthcare policy in this country, I continued. Because the people implementing your policies at the bedside, nurses, respiratory therapists, patient care technicians, we're not just following orders. We're the ones who see when protocols don't work, when medications cause unexpected reactions, when hospital systems fail the people they're designed to serve. For the next 15 minutes, I presented case studies that illustrated the disconnect between policy intentions and clinical reality. I described elderly patients who couldn't afford prescribed medications despite insurance coverage, hospital protocols that prioritized efficiency over dignity, and communication gaps that left families confused and frightened during medical crises. Healthcare policy without frontline input is like urban planning without talking to the people who live in the neighborhoods, I concluded. If we want healthcare systems that actually serve patients, we need to value the insights of everyone involved in patient care, regardless of their degree level or job title. The applause was immediate and sustained. I noticed several audience members rising to their feet, including Catherine Walsh and Dr. Chen. But my attention was drawn to Madison's table, where my sister sat with an expression of stunned recognition. During the reception that followed, I found myself surrounded by healthcare administrators, policy researchers, and medical executives eager to discuss my presentation. The conversation that had been deemed inappropriate at the Hartwell Gala was now the center of intense professional interest. "Miss Whitmore, that was extraordinary," said Dr. Patricia Reynolds, Chief Medical Officer at Mount Sinai. "We've been struggling with medication compliance issues in our cardiac unit. Would you be willing to consult on protocol development? I'd like to discuss incorporating your patient communication strategies into our residency training program," added Dr. James Morrison, whom I recognized as the physician Harold Peton had preferred to speak with at the charity gala. As the evening progressed, I received business cards, consulting opportunities, and invitations to speak at medical conferences across the country. The expertise that had been dismissed as shop talk at a charity event was being recognized as valuable professional insight at a healthcare policy gala. I was discussing research collaboration possibilities with a team from Johns Hopkins when Madison appeared at my elbow. "Jessica, that was quite a presentation," Madison said, her smile bright but her eyes calculating. "I had no idea you were so articulate about policy matters." "Thank you for coming," I replied politely, then turned back to the Hopkins researchers. "Dr. Martinez, you were talking about patient advocacy protocols." But Madison wasn't ready to be dismissed. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I borrow my sister for just a moment?" "Family business." The researchers exchanged glances, clearly recognizing a family dynamic they didn't want to navigate. They excused themselves politely, leaving me alone with Madison in the museum's sculpture garden. "That was quite a performance in there," Madison said, her carefully modulated tone carrying undertones I had learned to recognize over the years. "It wasn't a performance. It was my professional expertise." Of course," Madison waved dismissively. "Though, I have to say, it's interesting how much more confident you've become since your financial situation changed." I looked at my sister, beautiful, accomplished, and still fundamentally unable to accept that my transformation had nothing to do with money and everything to do with finally refusing to apologize for my choices. "Madison, my confidence didn't come from an inheritance. It came from recognizing that I don't need anyone else's approval to value my own expertise. But surely you can see how tonight validates what we've been telling you?" Madison pressed. "You clearly have leadership potential, communication skills, and the ability to influence important people. You could transition into healthcare administration, maybe run a hospital system someday. Why limit yourself to bedside nursing when you could have real power?" The question revealed everything I now understood about the fundamental difference in our perspectives. Madison saw power as position, influence as hierarchy, success as elevation above rather than impact within. "I have real power every day," I said quietly. When I help a frightened patient understand their diagnosis, when I catch a medication error that could have been fatal, when I hold someone's hand during the scariest moment of their life, that's not a limitation, Madison. That's purpose. Madison's expression shifted through confusion, frustration, and something that might have been envy. I don't understand you at all anymore. I know, I replied gently. And that's okay. We don't have to understand each other's choices to respect them. As we returned to the reception, I was approached by a distinguished man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo. He was tall, with silver hair, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to command. Miss Whitmore, I'm Anthony Richardson, CEO of Richardson Enterprises. I wanted to personally thank you for tonight's presentation. I shook his hand, noting the genuine warmth in his expression. Thank you for attending. I hope the healthcare policy perspective was useful. More than useful, transformative. Anthony's smile was engaging and entirely focused on me. I've been looking for someone with your combination of clinical expertise and policy insight to lead our corporate wellness initiative. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership? As we talked, I became aware that our conversation was drawing attention. Anthony Richardson was clearly someone whose presence commanded respect in this room, and his obvious interest in my work was being noted by everyone around us. I'd be very interested in exploring collaboration, I said. Healthcare policy needs more corporate engagement to be effective. Wonderful. Perhaps we could continue this conversation over dinner next week. The invitation was professional, but carried undertones that suggested Anthony's interest extended beyond my policy expertise. I found myself intrigued by both the professional opportunity and the man offering it. I'd like that very much. As Anthony handed me his business card, I caught sight of Madison's expression across the room. My sister was staring at us with undisguised shock, clearly recognizing Anthony Richardson's prominence and struggling to process this latest development in my rapidly evolving social position. The evening concluded with me surrounded by new professional contacts, speaking opportunities, and the beginnings of what felt like a significant personal connection. As I gathered my things to leave, Catherine Walsh approached with a satisfied smile. I think we can safely say this evening exceeded all expectations, Catherine said. How does it feel to be the most sought-after healthcare policy advocate in New York? I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. It feels like I'm finally where I belong. As I walked out of the Metropolitan Museum into the Manhattan evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Anthony Richardson. Thank you for an inspiring evening. Looking forward to our dinner conversation, Anthony. I smiled as I read the message, then noticed Madison approaching from across the street where Trevor was retrieving their car. Jessica, Madison called, hurrying over in her high heels. Wait, we need to talk about what? Madison's carefully composed expression had cracked, revealing genuine confusion and perhaps the first authentic emotion I'd seen from her in years. About everything, Madison said helplessly. About who you are, what you want, what this all means. 6 months ago, you were my little sister who needed guidance and financial support. Tonight, you're being courted by Anthony Richardson and commanding a standing ovation from medical professionals. I don't understand how this happened. I looked at my sister, still beautiful, still accomplished, still fundamentally unable to grasp that my transformation had been years in the making and had nothing to do with external validation. It happened because I stopped pretending to be smaller than I am, I said simply. The inheritance didn't change me, Madison. It just removed the fear that kept me from being myself fully. As Trevor pulled up in their BMW, Madison paused at the car door. Will you call me? Can we talk properly about all this? Of course, I replied. But Madison, the next time we talk, it needs to be as equals. Not as the successful sister and the struggling one, but as two women who've made different choices for different reasons. Madison nodded slowly, and for the first time, I saw genuine respect in her sister's eyes rather than condescending concern. As I walked toward the subway, my phone buzzing with conversations and a follow-up text from Anthony, I realized that tonight marked not just a professional triumph, but the completion of a journey that had begun with my grandmother's inheritance, and ended with something far more valuable than money, the unshakable knowledge of my own worth. The young woman who had been dismissed at a charity gala for sharing her medical expertise was now being courted by healthcare leaders across the country. But more importantly, she was finally free to be exactly who she had always been, a healer, an advocate, and a woman who measured success not by social position, but by the lives she touched and the systems she helped improve. As the subway carried me home to Queens, I smiled at my reflection in the dark window. Tomorrow, I would return to the cardiac ICU where my patients were waiting, but I would return as someone who no longer apologized for the life she had chosen to build.